Good evening, good Erev Shabbos, and thank you so much for joining me. This week we are going to read Parshas Korach, and much like Parshas Shlach, and like next week's Parsha as well, it is not a very cheerful Parsha. There are some very, very difficult experiences we know that we read about throughout Sefer Bamidbar, but much like last week, Parshas Korach does have some very, very important lessons. And even, if not especially, when we read stories in the Chumash that are not particularly cheerful and don't have the most positive conclusion, those stories are there in order to teach us. And of course, the messages of the Torah are timeless and always relevant. The theme, if you will, of Parshas Korach is certainly the theme of Machlokes. Korach, together with the group of followers that he was able to assemble, led a Machlokes against Moshe Rabbeinu, against his leadership. And at the conclusion of the story, the Torah instructs us explicitly, Lo yiyeh kekorach v'cha'adaso. We don't have to draw our own conclusions. The Torah makes it very, very clear that we, all future generations, should take note of what Korach did, of how he acted, of how the mob that gathered around him just sort of followed his lead without stopping and thinking for themselves. And the Torah tells us, don't be like Korach, and don't be like his Ada. Don't be part of that group. On the surface, Machlokes is terrible. We should always avoid Machlokes. Arguing, fighting, having debates with other people can be, as we know, very, very destructive. However, Machlokes is not necessarily always so bad. There are different types of Machlokes. In fact, in Pirkei Avos, in the 5th chapter, it says, Ko Machlokes shehi l'shem shemayim sofel hiskayim. The Mishnah says that a machlokes, which is l'shem shemayim, that would mean that those who are engaged in that machlokes are acting literally for the sake of heaven. Sofa lehiskayim, in the end, it will endure. V'she'ena l'shem shemayim, if it's machlokes which is not l'shem shemayim, so the individuals who are involved in that debate have some personal ulterior goals, so then ein sofa lehiskayim. So then, in the end, this will not endure. And the Mishnah goes on to say what is an example of a machlokes which is l'shem shemayim. So a machlokes of Hillel v'Shammai, and a machlokes which is ein l'shem shemayim. This is machlokes of Korach v'chol adasa. So you see very clearly in the Mishnah that not all machlokes is so terrible, and not all machlokes should be avoided. In fact, there is a concept of a machlokes which is l'shem shemayim. It almost seems as if the Mishnah is telling us that there are certain types of debates that we should actively seek out, that we should look for opportunities to be involved in what's called the machlokes l'shem shemayim. So what does it mean that it's sofa lehiskayim? In the end, it will endure. So in the Peirush of the Rav de Bartanura here on the Mishnah, he says two possibilities. One possibility is what it means, sofa lehiskayim. That means that the individuals who are involved in this debate, in the end, they will endure. Their memories will continue. Ve'enon ovdim. They will not be lost. They will not become a footnote of history, but rather they will be major individuals of influence even after they leave this world. And the Bartanura says, look, like Hillel and Shammai, their students continue their legacy, and to this very day, we study the words of Hillel and Shammai and Abaye and Rava and Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish. A machlokes, which is l'shem shemayim, sova lehiskayim, the bali machlokes, those who are involved in this debate, they will endure, and that will continue for many, many generations. Bartanura says another possibility. What does it mean, sofa? Sofa doesn't necessarily mean in the end, but over here it means, he says, tachlisa, the purpose, hamavukash me'inyana, the entire purpose in the first place. What does that mean? He says, a machlokes l'shem shemayim, when people are engaged in a machlokes for the right reasons, it's for the sake of heaven, that means what they are interested in is truth. They want to arrive at the truth. They are not looking to boost their own egos. They are not looking to be right. They are not looking to prove the other one wrong. Rather, they are just in pursuit of the truth. And sofa lehiskayim means, says the Bartanura, the purpose, the tachlis of that machlokes in the end will endure. Meaning, if you are really seeking truth, you will find it. If that is what is motivating you, if that is what is keeping you involved in this debate, well, then in the end, you will find what it is that you are looking for. You will, not only that, you will come closer to the truth. And we know that that is often the case. We certainly see it. And going back to the to the fact that Machlokes L'Shem Shemayim is Beis Hillel Beis Shammai, think about it. We continue to study the opinions of both Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, even though most often, in almost all cases, we paskin like Beis Hillel. But just because we follow Beis Hillel's opinion doesn't mean that we forget, that we completely disregard, and we have no interest in studying the opinion of Beis Shammai. We can only fully understand and appreciate the emes, which is reflected by the halacha as presented in the sheet of Beis Hillel, when we can understand it within the context and compare it and contrast it to the opinion of Beis Shammai. So both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, in the end, enable us to arrive to this place of truth. I want to suggest that there's another possibility. What does it mean that a machlokes, which is l'shem shemayim sof lehiskayim, and that is that we typically think that when there is a machlokes, when there is a debate, when there is conflict, so the goal is to try to end the conflict as soon as possible. And often, I would certainly agree, that is in fact the case. There are certain types of conflicts which can be very destructive. There's conflict that can be very toxic. There's conflict that could be very, very draining on the individuals who were involved in this conflict. So it goes without saying that often conflict must be resolved. However, there is conflict in life that can be constructive. There's conflict that can be formative. There's conflict that could be, in many, many ways, a source of fulfillment, that it can enable me to achieve a greater sense of clarity, not only in terms of my own thinking, but could really refine and shape and strengthen the relationship, particularly the relationship with the one with whom there is conflict. And so therefore, Chazal may be saying over here, if there is a machlokes in your life, and this is a machlokes which is l'shem shemayim, sofa lehiskayim, in the end, this machlokes can endure, and it will not wear you down. It will not destroy the relationship necessarily. It can be something which has a permanent kiyum. There's a famous individual who has written, studied, researched a lot about marriage, John Gottman. I'm sure that many of you have heard of his work, his studies. There's a Gottman Institute, and really tremendous amount of research that has been done studying why it is that certain marriages succeed and others fail, and has really zeroed in on some very, very key components of that which it would seem could be very, very positive indicators as to whether or not a marriage will ultimately have a kiyum. And he points out that there's a myth that many people have, that happy couples don't have conflict in their relationship. They basically have a conflict-free relationship, and that's why they're happy. But he points out that there's a very, very high percentage of marriages, I forgot what it is, but it's well into the 90s, of successful, happy, thriving marriages that endure, in which there is perpetual conflict. So to think that I can only have a kiyum in this relationship if we are able to somehow remove all conflict, that is a myth, and it does not reflect reality. The reality is that when machlokes is l'shem shemayim, when I'm not working against another individual, but rather I am working with another individual, side by side, not necessarily do we always agree. There are times that we have to have some disagreements, and it's important that both of us maintain our points of view, but at the same time, listen and understand and appreciate the input from the other. These types of conflicts can ultimately strengthen a relationship, and the kiyum is not only the relationship, but there is a kiyum in the conflict itself. Rabbi Lau in his Perushim Pirkei Avos, so he asks an interesting question. With this, I'll conclude. He says, how do you know if a machlokes is l'shem shemayim? How do you know? After all, there are a lot of times where people think that they are acting l'shem shemayim, but how do you know? How do you know, as was famously said, that your shem l'shemayim is l'shem shemayim? How do you know? So he suggests over here, he quotes from the Akedas Yitzchak, who explains that the way you can tell the difference is sort of alluded to in this Mishnah. Because what does it say? It says a machlokes, which is l'shem shemayim, sofa lihiskayim. What does that mean? So sofa, he says, means over here the purpose. The purpose is that there should be a kiyum, meaning the individuals who are involved in this machlokes are looking to sustain, to perpetuate, to keep whatever it is that they have at the moment going, just to take it perhaps to the next level, again, towards a place of greater refinement, understanding, clarity. However, a machlokes which is eino l'shem shemayim, so it's eino sof l'skayim, meaning what? It's the purpose is to destroy. It is to break down. It is to essentially erode and erase the relationship or whatever it is that we are debating. Now, of course, it must be said, and he in fact makes this acknowledgement that, yeah, there are times in life where there are certain things that need to be taken down and disassembled. There are things that need to be destroyed. But most often, more often than not in life, a machlokes, which is l'shem shemayim, will be one in which the driving force is sofa, is what? Lehiskayim, to bring about a kiyum, to enable us to sustain whatever it is and to strengthen it and to bring it to the next level. A machlokes, which is not l'shem shemayim, often will be, as he says over here, laharos, to destroy, to disassemble, to break down something which really could and should have a endurance as well. And so therefore we see that even though the Torah is very clear, lo yiyeh kekorach v'cha'ada, so that we should not be like Korach and his Eda, that we should remember that machlokes in life can be very, very destructive and very harmful. And more often than not, when we are involved in machlokes, we have to ask ourselves a very, very important question, and that is, should I be here right now? Is this something which is ultimately productive or not? But at the same time, the Torah is not telling us that we should try to avoid conflict in life. Conflict is not only a necessary part of life, it reflects an ideal. Because as Chazal tell us, the Gemara in Brachos, that just as we have different faces, we have different personalities as well, we have different opinions, because Baruch Hu did not create us in a way that we are all supposed to think the same and feel the same. We are supposed to have different points of view, and we are supposed to be able to share our points of view one with another. And if we do so, l'shem shemayim, sofa lehiskayim, which means, as the Bartanur says in the end, we and our legacies will endure. Sofa lehiskayim, which means the purpose of our debate in the first place, which was to achieve MS, will hopefully succeed, that we be able to come closer to the truth. And in the end, sofa lehiskayim, more often than not in life, the conflict itself will endure. But that's not a bad thing, because very often it is the machlokes, which is l'shem shemayim, which enables us to strengthen and to enrich all of the relationships that we have in our life. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful Shabbos.